Good afternoon and welcome to the latest update in the Ops webinar. Right, so it has been an incredibly busy month, so let's get into it. That first slide is a picture from Greece, and unless you've been on Mars, you won't have failed to realise what's going on in Europe at the moment, and we'll come on to what part we had to play in that later. Looking at the wider world, that's where we are at the moment. Normal places that we're doing at the moment that have been there for a while. Chile's popped its head up there. Very large earthquake beyond the 6 magnitude just off the coast of Chile, caused 15 sort of feet, which is about 5 meters tsunami. The Chileans are very, very well funded, very well organised, and no outside aid was required, and that was all turned off within 24 hours. So some of us thought that was going to be a major one, but the Chileans were very well prepared. Apparently there's over 1 million people evacuated overnight, fearing a larger tsunami. So that's how quickly they can mobilise down there. To Myanmar, if you look at the top right hand corner, right the way up in Kachin, that's the disputed area, very difficult place to operate. The floodwaters have moved down. The resident aid agencies that got permissions to work had that all tucked up in the north of the country. The team then went to have a look at the south, and at the time that the team was there, the water levels were basically up to the house roofs down there. Since the team has come back, they didn't deploy any aid up north because it was all taken care of. They didn't deploy any aid down south because the floodwaters were due to recede within a week, and then they would get the real sort of estimation and realisation of what the need was, and the people who were displaced would then be moving on. So they did not deploy any aid. The floodwaters have now receded, and it's all being dealt with from within. So there was no need for further action in Myanmar. Greece, the sort of like the highest profile deployment at the moment is to do with the European migration. Our role to play, it's quite complicated in that, so it's Europe, so we only deploy if it's more than 200 families, going to be in it for more than a month, and no one else can help. With Europe, they've signed up to a treaty that if a refugee comes over the European border, they have to be registered within that country, and then will be dealt with by Europe as a whole, and they will be allocated which country that is going to take them on, and there is a process for that, so we shouldn't be there. However, the Syrian refugee crisis has overwhelmed that system. Greece has also had its financial difficulties, so there is no money for them to respond locally. The rest of Europe don't wish to pour in money because they believe that they've got suspicions of where that money would go, but they were responding with money directly. The UN and the IOM, the International Office of Migration, they would have normally a part to play in this, but because it's Europe and those treaties are there, they were hanging back on the sidelines saying that this should be dealt with the treaties and regulations and plans that have been put in place. So we deployed a team to see if there was any part we could play. It's right on the outside edge of what we should be doing, but because of the seriousness of it, we decided that we would launch an assessment team. We believed that we could have a role to play in helping that registration. The boats were unloading people, and because of the registration being overloaded, they were spending 2-3 days in the baking sun after a long, harrowing journey, and families were just sleeping rough while they were being registered. Or if the transport was being overwhelmed beyond that registration, they were walking over the mountains as well, which was an 8-hour walk in the searing heat and the rough terrain, which was also causing people to collapse en route. So with the difficulties that they faced, they were working with the local government and the UN finally to issue 100 UN tents to help with the registration process. Since the team's come back, the UN has upped its efforts, and the registration process is now going a lot more smoothly. The problem has moved on, and it has reduced in Greece, but we're still monitoring with the IFRC and the UN to see whether we need to go back and help, or whether there are other places in Europe. At the moment, governments are not calling for tents, and they don't think that's an appropriate response at the moment. but they are looking at whether tarpaulins and blankets and other movable sort of carryable aid is more appropriate, and we'll see if we can fit in with that again on the outside edge of what we should be doing and can be doing, but we're looking at that to see whether we can do that and whether we should do that. An interesting point is that some of the refugees that had made it to Greece were actually carrying non-food items such as blankets that ShelterBox had given to them through partners in Syria. So it's positive proof that the aid that we're giving out is being used by people in this crisis. Nepal, ongoing distribution of tarpaulins to help with the rebuilding, and what they call lightning projects, which is local purchase of shelter kits, but instead of tarpaulins it's corrugated tin to help with the rebuild. And we're looking at doing another one of those projects with ACTED, and we'll report back on the success of those as we get the results. We'll be putting a team out there to see what is going on and overseeing it and getting the learning as for local purchase. But that's the Nepal thing. Iraq, well, I won't read out the figures, you can read them yourself, but the numbers have gone up. ISIS are now using chemical weapons. The Russians are upping their military activity in Syria. And the migration season is now coming to a close with colder weather coming in, so people can go on the move, but also rougher seas in the Mediterranean mean that the European end of the solution to get out of Syria is becoming more difficult, and also Europe closing its borders, Iraq might become more favourable. Team is likely in the near future. We're going to do some monitoring and evaluation of how our tents are faring. We've got two types of tent. We've got the UN tent and our tent to see how both are faring and see how our partners are getting on and whether we can move forward, as well as some comm stuff. Syria, that photograph you can see there is of the same street, and I believe it's Aleppo, and that's a very high class neighbourhood, and that shows you why people are leaving in their droves. It's just destroyed the place. We are in talks with, in fact, more talks. We've actually got stuff on the road, 600 UN tents to an unnamed agency. They're not unnamed to us, they're just a little bit coy about advertising their name and what they're doing in Syria so they can reach more people. Hand in hand for Syria, 100 UN tents. Those pipelines are now open, and we are mobilising tents with our partners to do that right now. And we've got further plans to help more people in Syria over the next coming few months and beyond. Niger, we've reported on this before. We're down to our last 500 boxes going out, and we're putting a team in to check what's going on and see what we can do in future. There is flooding, but we think that's a routine weather event, which, although their need is very real for the people involved in that, that's not our thing. We are disaster relief, not routine weather event and poverty. Although we will be looking at that to see if any of the refugee crisis from Nigeria is added to that strain, and if it is, then that does bring it into our remit. Cameroon, 1,000 tents arrived last week. They're being dispatched up north and being deployed by our partners, AIDA. There's been suicide bombings and kidnappings since we last did this webinar. So the security is still too dangerous for us to put ShelterBox representatives up there, but AIDA have done train the trainer with us, and they are very good at reporting. I don't want to do it. I really would prefer to have our team there, but safety is our top priority, so the next best thing is doing it with responsible and trained partners who are on the same message and ethos as ourselves. Remote distributions, we finally got a report back from the North Korean government about the 400 tents, boxes, stoves and winter kits that we did earlier in the year. And further to that, a typhoon has just gone through North Korea, and they have, when I say they, the North Korean embassy in London and North Korean government have approached us for further aid for this new disaster. There's about 5,000 families that have been displaced up in the top right hand corner in a city called Rajin near Vladivostok, and the Korean Red Cross have also provided us with independent data which tallies, so we're looking at responding to that pending permissions from our management. Tanzania team is going in. The IOM and the UN have finally got a program going, and we'll be helping with 300 tents as part of that program, and the team is going in. Afghanistan, we believe there will be flooding and landsliding in the spring. A difficult place to operate, so we're getting ahead of time by putting 350 UN tents with ACTED ready for that. Dominica, a storm went through part of the hurricane season that's just started in the Caribbean. The Curacao boxes that we've got stored with the Dutch Navy got in touch and they responded. Shelter was not a priority, so they didn't load the boxes. Rotary were looking at responding, but in the end it was just food and water that was needed. But I did test the system. Rotary were on side wanting to help, and the Dutch Navy with our stored boxes were also front and centre with their response. So that's good that works, and hurricane season has just started. Macedonia is the spillover from the Greek, Syrian, European refugee/migrant crisis, and we are looking at the huge numbers there. And Habitat for Humanity are our partners over there. They are, what I reported earlier in this, is that they're looking at tarpaulins and blankets, but they seem to have got the situation covered at the moment, and they will look to see what happens as the situation is changing day by day. Ecuador's got a volcano that was kicking out lots of ash. It's calmed down a bit, so that's taken off our board, but it's here because we haven't spoken about it. Pakistan is flooding at the moment, and we're looking at what we can do with Plan and ACTED to see if we can respond. A lot of people displaced there. Guatemala was flooding, but the International Federation of Red Cross and Habitat for Humanity say they have got that covered. So that isn't those two. Guatemala is now a sealed off issue, but it's new to the webinar. So next, in the next week, we'll be putting a monitoring and evaluation team into Malawi. Quite a lot of aid in there. We were pretty much the main sort of players with aid in Malawi because it was remote. Not very well funded, but thanks to you, we were funded up front and we did quite a response in Malawi. So we want to know how we can do things better. Because Malawi is very, very poor, are those people actually back in shelter now? How did the stopgap go, and how we can respond better next time? So that, I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that, because that will have some interesting results on what equipment we supplied. We've got shelter kits and boxes and tarps, so we can compare and contrast there. And also we had cluster representation, and we had the in-country coordinating our efforts. So lots of interesting things, particularly the poverty element of it, and how our aid actually played a part in that very poor country and going onwards. What can we be to be that proper stopgap between nothing and the next thing, when there might not be any next thing coming, whether it's appropriate for us to look into that area or not. So I will be reporting on that hopefully next time we speak. Thank you very much for your time, and I will be speaking at you next time. So ALFE, that's Alfie at ShelterBox.org. If you want any specific questions answered, longer, shorter, or any different topics or any special guest stars. So thank you very much for your time.